The critic Walter Benjamin had this to say about the monoprint Angelus Novus by his friend the artist Paul Klee.
This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress.
We can never be free of this storm, because it's this storm that makes the world and therefore makes us. We are the debris being swept up and projected forward, until we as individuals collapse and crumble, and more debris is simply swept up in the same way. History is the collective consciousness of our species. Prehistory is our subconsciousness. Whatever we were and did in those times before we could record language, it has stayed in our unconsciousness. It has not evolved away into the emptiness of prehistory. It stays and shapes our present. Our history is merely the record of the results, as much as our consciousness can feebly understand them, or even comprehend them. The crimes and failures of the past are what makes us, but they do not inform us. In fact, in many cases, these crimes have been deliberately pushed into the subconscious as deeply as possible, so not as to annoy us. The history of Australia, for example, is a history of invasion, dispossession and slaughter, and because of that, it is impossible for we basically good Australians of today to admit that without completely betraying everything we've made up about ourselves and admitting what we really are. Any wonder any attempt to bridge the gap and tell the truth is met with hostility, resistance and denial. The conquest must continue in some way or another. But then, what is the alternative? What would come of dredging up the past and putting it on trial? Because Australia's bloody history is deeply buried in the subconsciousness of all of us, conqueror and conquered, and any restructuring would simply repeat the same crimes. There is no going back to a past before history that is gone and conquered, however much remembered or misremembered, not for Australia or anywhere. History wiped away prehistory and set itself up as the engine of the world, fueled as much by prehistory as its own hubris. The only present we have is the present that history has made, and the only future we may have can only be made from the materials of the present, and that is why we are doomed to a constant present of struggle, conflict and failure. And that is how it is all over the world and has been all through time. Even though the effects of all that history is felt in the immediate here and now, history cannot be shaken off to reinvent ourselves into something new. Such a thing would be impossible. All we have to build from is what history has given us, and that cannot be counted on to make something that defies the very materials we would build with. We counted on technology to liberate us, but didn't count on the venality of the ruling classes because we chose to forget the violent and aggressive forces of history that brought those classes into being. So now we are disappointed even with technology, and once again face the future as an empty repetition of the past, only with more LED lights. We counted on the revolutions to liberate us, but didn't count on the stupidity of the leaders of those revolutions, who believed that history could be completely and consciously swept aside in a matter of a generation or two to birth an entirely new species of human. So millions and millions of people were pushed into the same pre-revolutionary, feudalistic privation and captivity for nearly a century until the whole enterprise collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. All our imagined utopias of the future are just made from the selective memories of the past, the good old days simply rebranded as the good new days. At this stage in our history, we cannot imagine the future anymore outside of post-apocalypse fantasies. Even the good new days are the good old days now, back to the blurry nostalgia they always were. History has not ended. The storm still blows from paradise. There is a teleological end to it all, but because we are being blown backwards, we cannot see it and probably couldn't understand it. We'll hit it when we hit it, and when we do, then we can count on the end of history and our liberation from its prison. Of course, none of us will be around to enjoy it, but that's precisely the point.